In my 7th year of being reborn into the Shen family, the family had already risen to great heights. My second sister, dissatisfied with the emperor's arranged marriage, insisted on marrying the newly appointed top scholar. My parents, having grown bold, took her and fled overnight. My brother, who had already become the prime minister, couldn't bear to bring them back. He looked at me, a 7-year-old scrawny child, and said, "Afu, the Shen family cannot defy the imperial decree. You will marry into the general's mansion in place of your second sister." I trembled as I hid in the corner, stealing a glance at his resolute gaze. That general, rumored to be a fierce warrior who could kill a tiger with his bare hands, so terrifying, so dreadful, I feel like crying, but I had no other choice. So I tremblingly put on the wedding dress that had been altered from my second sister's. My brother personally stuffed me into the bright red wedding sedan chair. And I entered the general's mansion. The servant came to report. He said the Wei family's wedding procession would arrive in the time it takes for one incense stick to burn. The nanny had just finished dressing me in the wedding gown and placing the phoenix crown on my head. The phoenix crown was somewhat heavy, and I couldn't bear its weight for a moment, causing my shoulders to tremble slightly. The wet nurse stood behind me, her hand trembling as she held the comb. Her gaze fixed on my reflection in the bronze mirror. Her eyes were already red and swollen. After a long pause, she suddenly set down the comb and rushed out the door. The sound of hurried footsteps mingled with the steady, deliberate steps of someone entering the courtyard. The Wei family's carriage is almost here. It must be my brother Shen Yuzhou coming to hurry me along. I sat there in a daze. After a long while, I heard a dull thud outside the door, a forehead hitting the bluestone bricks, followed by the nanny's tearful pleas. "Please, sir, bring the second young lady back. That General Wei who just arrived in the capital is notoriously cruel and violent. The third young lady is still so young. How could she endure entering such a den of tigers?" Shen Yuzhou's voice was cold and impatient. "Zhaoyun has been kidnapped by bandits. Having Afu marry over there temporarily is a stopgap measure to protect the Shen family." The nanny's voice was filled with reluctance. "But I clearly heard a few days ago, the guards reported to the Lord that they found the second young lady and the Lord and Lady outside the city." My heart jolted, and I secretly glanced over through the window. I had thought that my second sister, Shen Zhaoyun, had truly escaped without a trace. Shen Yuzhou's face darkened, his expression filled with anger. The steward stepped forward and slapped my wet nurse hard across the face. "On the master's joyous day, you dare to cry and talk back? Get out of here and take your punishment." The nanny felt sorry for me. As the guards grabbed me to drag me away, for the first time, I disregarded everything and spoke with a furious tone. "Sir, have you forgotten? It is the fortune brought by the third young lady that has allowed the Shen family to reach where it is today. If you send the third young lady away, aren't you afraid the fortune will follow?" Before she could finish her words, Shen Yuzhou suddenly erupted in rage, drew the guard's sword, and pressed it against her neck. Once upon a time, Shen Yuzhou would tell everyone that I was a lucky star sent from heaven. Now he has risen to the position of prime minister, second only to the emperor, yet he is the most unwilling to hear anyone mention the so-called fortune I brought. And he has long since drifted away from me. A murderous intent surged in his eyes, his voice icy cold. "Absurd, utter nonsense." The cold gleam of the sword blade flashed into my eyes. For a moment I was dazed, then abruptly rose in panic. Under the weight of the heavy phoenix crown, I stumbled unsteadily out the door. As I reached out and grabbed Shen Yuzhou's sword-wielding hand, I looked at the thin trickle of blood seeping from the nanny's neck. My fingers tightening around the wide sleeves of my wedding dress. After a long silence, I spoke softly. I will obediently marry into that family, but I want to take my wet nurse with me. Now, the only one in the Shen family who still truly cares about me is my wet nurse." Shen Yuzhou tried to shake off my hand. Hearing this, his face suddenly froze. Ever since he decided to have me take her place in marriage, I had been crying and making a scene for half a month, even last night. I was still playing the drama of crying, making a fuss, and threatening suicide. I wasn't angry, nor was I throwing a tantrum. That Wei Changqing, the brute rumored to be able to kill a tiger with his bare hands, I was truly afraid of him. But at this moment, seeing Shen Yuzhou's icy expression as he drew his sword, I knew he had already made up his mind, and no one could change it. A flicker of something strange passed through Shen Yuzhou's eyes, but it quickly returned to cold indifference. It's good that you understand, so you can avoid more suffering. The sound of gongs and drums filled the air. With both parents away from home, the eldest brother acts as the father. Shen Yuzhou, following the proper etiquette, carried me into the bridal sedan chair. I settled into the sedan chair. As he leaned in to step back, it seemed my sudden calm and obedience made him uneasy, or perhaps it was a rare flicker of guilt. Hesitantly, he reached out and took my hand, which hung limply at my side. In a few years, I'll find a way to bring you back. You're still young. Wei Changqing can't do anything to you. But Zhaoyun, I reached out, silently pushing his hand away bit by bit. Outside the sedan, the wedding matron urged softly. Shen Yuzhou's expression was conflicted, as if he wanted to speak but hesitated, and in the end, he withdrew from the sedan. The wedding matron gave the order to lift the sedan. The wind lifted the curtain by my side. That Shun residence where I had lived for 7 years quickly passed by in my line of sight, swiftly disappearing behind the sedan chair. In truth, when I first transmigrated into this world, I truly had fantasies. Perhaps I, who had never been loved before, would finally experience an ordinary life. I have parents and an elder brother who will always love and protect me. But in the end, it was just a fantasy. After all, I still have the heart of a 7-year-old. I couldn't hold back any longer and buried myself in my nanny's embrace, trembling and weeping uncontrollably. The nanny flusteredly tried to soothe me, but I was filled with grievance and fear, unable to stop crying no matter what. During the wedding ceremony, that burly man who had once killed a tiger with his bare hands stood beside me. My height barely reached his waist. My nanny is no longer by my side. I clenched my hands tightly, still feeling afraid. Lowering my gaze, I saw the sleeves of the man's wedding robe from beneath the bridal veil. Then, I suddenly caught sight of several knife scars on the back of his hand. Some of the twisted, ferocious scars made me imagine his face covered in brutish flesh, and I shuddered violently in fear. I nearly knocked over the tea the maid handed me to offer in respect. The scarred hand beside me reached out toward me. I instinctively stepped back in panic. That hand froze for a moment, then silently withdrew. My brother Shen Yuzhou called out to me in a hushed voice, his tone displeased. Shen Fu, don't be unreasonable. But I really was just scared. After the wedding ceremony, I sat on the bridal bed in the wedding chamber, still waiting in vain for my nanny to return. A maidservant stood beside me, silent as a statue. I lowered my gaze, only able to see the unfamiliar tips of her embroidered shoes. As the night deepened, the clamor outside seemed to have faded somewhat. I was gradually getting so hungry that my stomach started to ache. I didn't dare ask where the nanny had gone, nor did I dare ask when the meal would be served. My body kept trembling, and tears began to fall again. I secretly reached out and wiped away the tears haphazardly from under the bridal veil, until the door was suddenly pushed open. The maidservant respectfully called out, "General." My mind was filled with the tiger that, according to the rumors spread by the children in the streets, had been brutally killed by Wei Changqing. At that moment, he pushed the door and entered. I could no longer control my fear. Trembling, I lifted my hand to remove the bridal veil, my heart filled with terror as I tried to run outside. The man who had just stepped through the door, his hand raised to untie the sash of his bright red robe, froze in an instant. The maid gasped in panic, "Madam, this This is improper etiquette. Please cover your head at once." As she spoke, she reached to put my veil back on, but when she saw my face, it was as if she had seen a ghost, the terror in her eyes growing even more intense. The man at the door had thick eyebrows and bright, star-like eyes, not the brutish, fleshy face I had imagined. His imposing figure loomed, with arms thicker than my waist. I was too terrified to even stand up, and my legs were already weak from hunger, let alone run. Trembling for a long while, I could only force out a tearful whimper. I want to see my nanny." The maid picked up the veil, intending to cover my head again. The man's lips trembled slightly as he raised his hand to rub his temple. After a long pause, he said, "Forget it, leave." The maid immediately withdrew and closed the door. The nuptial wine was laid out on the table. Wei Changqing walked over and placed the sword he was carrying on the table. At the faint sound, my body trembled once again. He seemed to realize something. He stood up and placed the sword a little farther away. Then he sat back down and called out to me gruffly, "Little girl, come have a drink." I didn't dare disobey. The good girl propped herself up by the bed and walked over to sit down. The wine had just touched her lips. The wine, served in a gourd ladle, was so bitter that it sent me into a violent coughing fit, even bringing tears to my eyes. Wei Changqing sighed and looked toward the door, saying, "Bring a bowl of candied fruit soup." He silently drank both bowls of the ceremonial wedding wine by himself. I drank a bowl of sweet soup, but it only seemed to make me hungrier, my stomach growling. Wei Changqing ordered a meal to be served. I was absolutely starving by the time the maid brought the food and left. I wolfed down a large bowl of rice and devoured 2 big chicken legs. Between mouthfuls of food, I kept glancing warily at the man sitting across from me and the sword resting on the rack. The man showed no intention of getting up, nor did he move his sword. It seemed he had no immediate plans to take action. I nervously finished the chicken leg in my hand and reached out to grab another. The dishes were pushed further away, and Wei Changqing's face showed a hint of shock. "It's so small. Don't overeat and upset your stomach." He wouldn't let me eat anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't dare let them fall, clutching tightly the now meatless chicken leg bone in my hand. Wei Changqing sighed again. He stood up and, after a moment, brought over a basin of water. The damp cloth moved toward my face. I panicked and tried to dodge. Wei Changqing threatened me, saying, "Sometimes I hit children too." My body froze in an instant, my heart filled with terror. The handkerchief that brushed past my face left behind a smear of rouge. It suddenly dawned on me that I had shed so many tears. My face must have been a mess long ago. No wonder the maid looked as if she had seen a ghost when I lifted my bridal veil. Wei Changqing used several handkerchiefs to clean me up thoroughly. He frowned and pondered for a long while. Only then did he manage to successfully remove the phoenix crown and hair accessories from my head. In the deep of the night, he glanced at the only bed in the room. After a long moment of thought, he looked at me again. I instinctively shrank my neck. This time, he didn't even sigh. He took the bedding and spread it on the floor beside the bed, leaving the bed for me. I had worn the phoenix crown all day and was utterly exhausted. Finally, I couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed onto the bed. As I was drifting off to sleep, I saw Wei Changqing quietly rise in the candlelight. He walked toward the sword on the rack and reached out to take it. I sprang up from the bed. When Wei Changqing heard the noise and turned to look at me, I had already shrunk into the corner of the bed. Staring at him in terror, the candle flame flickered in the night, and I was reminded once again of that dead tiger. I bit my lip hard, trembling like a sieve. Wei Changqing's hand ultimately withdrew. He walked back to the bed but did not lie down. Instead, he sat on the bedding on the floor, looking at me and said, "I'm not taking it, I'm going to sleep." Before the words had even finished, a sudden change occurred. There was a faint rustling sound from the roof. An arrow suddenly shot down, instantly piercing the bed canopy above my head. Wei Changqing's face darkened abruptly as he lunged toward me. My body followed his as he dodged the arrows, tumbling onto the bed. More than a dozen arrows followed closely behind. As Wei Changqing carried me off the bed, I saw a large hole had been torn through the roof. A masked man in black clothes descended from the cave entrance, holding a sword. Wei Changqing narrowed his eyes and reached for the sword on the rack. Then, as the man in black thrust his sword toward me, he swiftly dodged to the other side. The man in black laughed arrogantly. "General Wei, the emperor promised you a beauty, so why did they send a mere child?" Wei Changqing, holding me in his arms, couldn't fully use his skills and was forced to retreat step by step. The courtyard outside was eerily silent. The maids and guards seemed to have vanished. I glanced again at the sword on the rack. Suddenly I realized, Wei Changqing carried the sword with him not to harm me. The men in black kept pressing forward, and Wei Changqing gradually had no more room to retreat. He had no choice left. Breathing heavily, he finally set me down against the wall. "Lean against the wall and don't move." I obediently did as told, my entire body trembling like a sieve. Wei Changqing engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the sword-wielding man in black. Seizing the right moment, he drew a sword from the rack. He quickly gained the upper hand, the sharp blade about to pierce the opponent's chest. A strange movement came from the window behind me. Before I could even lift my eyes to look, a dark figure swiftly flashed before me, the sharp gleam of a sword piercing into my vision. A buzzing filled my ears, and the world spun wildly before my eyes. In the blankness of my mind, I vaguely saw Wei Changqing push the black-clad figure away. By the time I regained my senses, he had already shielded me with his own body. The sword in the black-clad man's hand pierced through his back and into his chest. Urgent footsteps echoed in the courtyard, and the door was abruptly pushed open as the guards finally arrived. The two black-clad men swiftly fled. I saw blood gushing from Wei Changqing's chest. Wei Changqing fainted. Several physicians arrived at the general's residence, their expressions grave, and diagnosed that the sword blade was poisoned. I stood trembling outside the room. I don't know how severe the poisoning is, and I dare not ask. The maids kept coming in and out, carrying out basin after basin of white cloth stained with blood. One of the maids glanced at me standing outside the door, her expression full of disgust. Who knows if she did it on purpose? The Prime Minister is from the Empress Dowager's faction, yet he sent such a young sister with such great skills. The general has always been cautious, so why is he so impulsive and careless this time? Perhaps it's because she looks like. The maidservants walked away, their voices gradually fading. I can't quite understand. I only vaguely grasped one thing. The poison was serious, and Wei Changqing's condition wasn't good. The next day at noon, the wet nurse finally arrived. It was said that Shen Yuzhou, fearing she would run away with me on their wedding night, had locked her in the Shen residence for the entire night. I sat outside the door all night, cold and terrified, yet I dared not make a single sound. When the wet nurse came over, she held me tightly in her arms. Only then did my throat begin to choke with sobs, and tears poured out, soaking into her clothes. The nanny gently patted my back. "Don't be afraid, Afu. General Wei is blessed and will surely be fine." Just yesterday, she had said that Wei Changqing was cruel and violent. She called the general's residence a den of tigers. At this moment, his eyes were red-rimmed, and his expression was visibly moved. Leaning against my wet nurse's embrace, I truly couldn't understand. "Wet nurse, why did he save me?" After a long silence, my wet nurse still didn't answer me. Probably, she couldn't figure it out either. When I was 3 years old, I fell into a pond while playing carelessly. At that time, my parents and older brother still cared for me a little. Since none of them knew how to swim, no one dared to jump in to save me, until the servants who could swim were called to fish me out. I was nearly breathless. Perhaps in moments of crisis, people's first instinct is always to protect themselves. Whether in my past life or in this life I gained through rebirth, I have never been chosen by someone who disregarded their own life in a moment of life and death, but Wei Changqing. Why would he risk his life to save me? He must have known the sword was poisoned. He must have known that protecting me would inevitably leave his back exposed to the enemy. The nanny held me tightly and, after a long while, finally said, "Perhaps Afu is blessed by fortune through a twist of fate. She ended up marrying a good man." She glanced inside the door and sighed softly. May the Bodhisattva protect her. Wei Changqing remained unconscious, having not woken for 7 days. Many officials came to visit. Even the emperor sent his personal eunuch to deliver several boxes of precious medicinal herbs. It wasn't until the 7th day that Shen Yuzhou finally rushed over. Looking hurried and flustered, I received the news. My parents took my second sister Shen Zhaoyun back to the Prime Minister's residence. Shen Yuzhou entered the palace to apologize to the emperor. He claimed that Shen Zhaoyun had been abducted by bandits and had only just been recovered. To avoid missing the auspicious date set by the emperor, they had no choice but to have me marry into the Shen family. For now, I'll be a child bride, and will consummate the marriage once I come of age. Shen Yuzhou naturally knew that the emperor's displeasure indicated some suspicion, but in recent years, the Empress Dowager's faction had monopolized power, and the emperor was, to put it bluntly, nothing more than a puppet. Shen Yuzhou's current actual authority even surpassed that of the emperor. He was no longer afraid. Shen Zhaoyun defied the emperor's will, and while the emperor was displeased, the Empress Dowager was especially pleased. The Empress Dowager personally arranged another marriage for Shen Zhaoyun. It was exactly what Shen Zhaoyun had hoped for. She was betrothed to the newly appointed top scholar, the young man who had long been secretly involved with her. He was chosen by the Empress Dowager and pre-selected as the top scholar. Now that he had entered the Hanlin Academy, he was at the peak of his glory. The Shen family was overjoyed and lavishly prepared the dowry. My parents didn't come to see me. Perhaps they forgot. Or perhaps they were too overjoyed to remember. Shen Yuzhou didn't manage to free up some time until the 7th day. To keep up appearances, he hastily came to take a look at Wei Changqing. I stood under the corridor, watching him stride over. His steps were light and brisk, his face beaming with a sense of triumph. Shen Zhaoyun was finally going to marry the one she loved, just as she had wished, and he, the Prime Minister, had successfully drawn the newly appointed top scholar into his camp, ensuring an even broader and more promising future. He strode up the steps of the corridor, intending to go inside to see Wei Changqing. As if finally noticing my presence, he turned his head slightly and lowered his gaze. Meeting my eyes from where I stood not far away, the lightness on his face had not yet had time to fade. A flicker of guilt flashed hastily in the man's eyes, and he cleared his throat softly. "It's freezing out here in the corridor. Why don't you come inside?" I silently clenched the hem of my clothes, watching him calmly. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I have been married into the Wei family for 7 days now. The nanny said I should have returned to my parents' home on the 3rd day, but Wei Changqing is severely injured and unconscious, so I cannot go back alone. The Shen family is busy with Shen Zhaoyun's wedding, and not a single person has come to ask about me. Shen Yuzhou and I locked eyes for a moment before he awkwardly averted his gaze. He practically fled in a fluster, entering the room where Wei Changqing lay. After a round of insincere concern, he left behind a few nourishing supplements. In less than the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, he walked out. As he descended the steps, his figure paused for a moment, yet he turned back and strode toward me. There was no one else under the corridor. He glanced around, then leaned in close and lowered his voice. "That is no ordinary poison on the sword. If he does not wake by tonight, there may be no saving him. When the time comes, I will come for you." My eyes nearly burst with fury as I sharply cut him off. "No. He will definitely wake up." Shen Yuzhou's face froze, and for a long moment, He couldn't speak. He seemed utterly bewildered by my reaction. I don't know why, but suddenly I felt overwhelmed with sorrow and fear. I clenched my hands tightly, raised my eyes, and glared fiercely at him, saying, even if he never wakes up, I will still stay here. I will always stay here. Shinjujo's face was filled with astonishment, anger, and disappointment quickly surfaced in his eyes. Do you know what you're saying, Shinfu? The capital is about to face a storm. A country warrior who was brought to the capital by an incompetent emperor to serve as a general. If you stay here forever, you're only seeking your own doom. His voice was extremely low, yet he couldn't suppress the emotional agitation. I looked at his tightly furrowed brow. It seemed as though he was genuinely worried and cared about me. If only, 7 days ago, he hadn't forced me into the bridal sedan without a word of explanation. I found it amusing and couldn't help but say, brother, since you know the capital is about to change, did you just find out today? The emperor's marriage decree cannot be taken back. If you take me back, are you willing to let second sister come instead? Shinjujo's face darkened. After a long pause, he spoke with a tone of disdain, his voice low and direct. That puppet emperor won't last much longer. This empire has long been the Empress Dowager's domain, and the new child emperor has already been chosen. I can't believe it, such treasonous words today. He could now speak so boldly and openly outdoors, despite being surrounded by spies. I looked at the arrogant and unrestrained pride in his expression now, bordering on contempt for everything. It's exactly the same expression my parents have now. A world of difference from how they were many years ago, when I first transmigrated into this world. I was a nearly full-term baby in Mother Shun's womb. Back then, the Shun family was still the poorest of farming households. My mother was nearly 40 when she unexpectedly became pregnant with me. A severe drought struck the land, and the imperial court allocated relief funds. The Empress Dowager held absolute power. The young emperor was incompetent, and corrupt officials ran rampant. The silver was embezzled layer by layer, until all that remained for the county magistrate to distribute were a few baskets of nearly spoiled steamed buns. The victims swarmed to receive steamed buns, and dozens were trampled to death on the streets. Women and children wailed in the streets. The county magistrate sat in the main hall, drinking and enjoying himself with the officials sent by the court to provide disaster relief. 15-year-old Shinjujo was filled with grief and indignation. He rushed to the county office and struck the grievance drum outside the yamen. The official ignored his pleas for the people, only ordering the bailiffs to nearly break both his legs. He lay at home for more than half a month, but the people remembered him. Countless people hoped that this young man would one day top the imperial examinations, become a high-ranking official, and seek a way of survival for the common people. Yet Shinjujo was disheartened, resentful of the bleak future ahead, and even impulsively contemplated ending his life. That was also the reason the system sent me to redeem the Shun family. On the day my mother gave birth to me, Shinjujo, lost in a daze, went to the riverbank, but then came the sudden news that he had passed the imperial examination and become a scholar. The court was corrupt, and the local governments were even worse. Even the title of scholar was constantly bought, sold, and predetermined. Shinjujo never expected that he would become the exception. That was the first thing I obtained for him using the system I brought from transmigrating into the book. It was like a crack suddenly torn open in the dark night, letting light pour through. That night, the Shun family was ecstatic. My parents said I was a heavenly blessing, and that it must have been the fortune I brought with me. Shinjujo also held me tightly, his eyes red. He told everyone that I was the one who brought him blessings and a way out. That night, after drinking, he spoke with a firm and resolute voice amidst the dimming lights. If one day I rise to power, I will only seek to eliminate the wicked and plead for the well-being of the people. And now, he finally holds power over the court, yet he has dissolved into the darkness. just like that county magistrate back then, uttering, "This empire has long been the Empress Dowager's empire." I can no longer describe the feeling. In the end, I couldn't hold back and, as the system had instructed me, offered him a few words of advice. He who loses the people's hearts loses the empire. The one who is like the setting sun, fading in the west, truly cannot last much longer. His Majesty has grown up and is no longer the young emperor he once was. Shinjujo, however, could no longer bear to listen. He interrupted me impatiently. "Shinfu, you're just a 7-year-old child. What could you possibly understand about court politics? Back then, I just happened to guess a few things right by chance. Don't act all mysterious about it now." He resented me telling him what to do again. He hated that I reminded him that a child, who is only 7 years old now, had played a part in getting him to where he is today. Shinjujo lost his patience completely and stormed off in a huff. He only left behind an angry remark, "If you want to stay, then stay. You'll regret it soon enough." I watched his resolute retreating figure. The corridor was empty and silent. I knew clearly that this time, I had truly been abandoned. I knew clearly that I could no longer persuade anyone in the Shin family. A mist rose in my eyes. My hands trembled as I tightly clenched the hem of my clothes. I suppressed the impulse to call out to him, a reflex born from a moment of unease. I always seemed to be abandoned. In my previous life, I only lived for 9 years. When I was 3 years old, my mother became pregnant with my younger brother. She deliberately took me into a bustling crowd and pretended to accidentally lose me. At the age of 5, I was diagnosed with a heart defect. My adoptive parents couldn't bear the medical expenses and abandoned me back at the orphanage. At the age of 8, I was diagnosed with heart failure. The orphanage director took my diagnosis report and started a live stream online to raise donations. After running the live stream for over half a year, I received over 100,000 in donations. I still didn't get hospitalized, nor was I able to take any proper medication. Later, it was revealed that the director had been squandering the donations on lavish spending. Netizens were outraged, demanding refunds and accusing me of being in cahoots with the director. The night the dean was arrested, the whole internet cheered in relief. I fell ill and died quietly in the orphanage, with no one knowing. Perhaps my short life was truly too tragic. So, as I lay dying, a voice from the air, calling itself a system, sought me out. It gave me the chance to live on in another world. I thought that in this new life, perhaps sincerity could be exchanged for sincerity, but in the end, I was still discarded. I stood dazedly under the corridor, that figure long gone from sight. I was reminded again of what Shinjujo had said, if he doesn't wake up after tonight, there's likely no turning back. That fear and unease surged through me once more. In a state of panic, I hurried toward Wei Changqing's bedroom, but when I looked up, I suddenly met the gaze of someone standing at the door, looking right at me. My steps abruptly froze. I bit my lip hard, trembling, and the tears I had been holding back unexpectedly fell. Wei Changqing had woken up. He must have been standing there for a while, the pallor on his face having faded considerably. Perhaps he had also overheard the conversation between me and Shinjujo. My heart suddenly settled back into my chest, and I could no longer hold back my tears as I rushed over to him. I just wanted to ask if he was still feeling unwell, and I thought perhaps I should also apologize. He seemed to misunderstand my meaning, stepping out the door and walking toward me, following my rush toward him. He caught me with one hand, lifted me up, and then wiped the tears from my eyes. My body suddenly lifted into the air, startling me so much that my face was filled with terror. Wei Changqing paused for a moment, realizing I didn't want to be held, and bent down to set me back on the ground, with tears in my eyes. I looked up and stared intently at him. I just wanted to say something to him, words of concern or an apology. But in that moment of nervousness and urgency, I couldn't utter a single word. Wei Changqing, however, Probably thought I was being wary and guarded against him. The faint smile that had just begun to form at the corners of his lips as he held me faded awkwardly. A fleeting trace of loneliness flashed in his eyes before he finally spoke after a long pause. "There's no need to have your second sister come in your place. When the time is right, I will seek the emperor and request a letter of divorce." It took me a moment to understand what he meant, and I widened my eyes in confusion. You're sending me away." Wei Chongqing crouched down. He looked into my eyes, remaining silent for a long while, as if carefully weighing his words. "Don't you want to leave? Your brother isn't wrong. Staying with me will likely not lead to a good outcome." I looked at him with a mix of grievance and unease. "I've already told my brother. I'm not going back. If you want to drive me away," I wanted to say, "I can still go somewhere else. Even though I'm always being abandoned, I don't want to appear pitiful." But no matter how much I thought about it, there was really nowhere else I could go. I stopped mid-sentence. My face flushed red as I bit my lip in embarrassment. Wei Chongqing stared into my eyes. A faint glimmer gradually surfaced in the dim depths of his gaze. The man reached out and effortlessly took one of my hands into his palm. "But Shun Fu, if you are truly willing to stay here, if someday, this capital, this world, faces turmoil, I will do my best to protect you." I bit my lip until it bled, my throat choked with emotion. Reaching out, she tightly wrapped her arms around his neck. Wei Chongqing chuckled softly. Seemingly in high spirits, he scooped me up in his arms and strode toward the courtyard, his voice bright and clear. "Let's go have lunch. I'll get you your favorite chicken drumsticks." The guard hurriedly followed and reminded, "The general hasn't fully recovered yet and shouldn't exert too much force." Wei Chongqing's footsteps didn't pause as his clear voice rang out, "It's no trouble. She's as light as a kitten, barely any weight at all." I continued to live peacefully in the general's residence, and before I knew it, nearly half a year had passed. Shun Zhaoyun and the top scholar's wedding date was set for February of the following year. Shun Yuzhou and my parents accompanied her every day. And no one came to see me again. Winter arrived, and the new year was just around the corner. Wei Chongqing made time to take me out to the market streets. As we wandered into a jewelry shop, we unexpectedly ran into Shun Zhaoyun and that top scholar, along with my parents and Shun Yuzhou. They were gathered around Shun Zhaoyun, having already picked out several exquisite pieces of jewelry, probably the dowry items prepared for her. No one paid any attention to me, and I didn't go over to invite displeasure. I went with Wei Chongqing to another area to pick out hairpins, wanting to buy one for my nanny. I had just spotted one I liked when Shun Zhaoyun suddenly walked over. She pointed at the hairpin I had chosen on the counter and said, "Shopkeeper, wrap this one up for me as well." I turned my head, lifted my eyes, and gave her a cold stare. I saw this first. Shun Zhaoyun met my gaze, showing a surprised expression. "Ah Fu, what are you doing here?" As she spoke, she smiled again and said, "This is an adult's jewelry. Children can't wear it." I didn't really care that much about it, but somehow, I felt a stubborn anger welling up inside me and insisted, "I'll buy it and keep it for now, then wear it when I can." Shun Zhaoyun's voice was filled with helplessness and restraint. All right, I'll let you have second sister." As soon as she finished speaking, the displeased gazes of the Shun family members all turned toward me. Shun Yuzhou said angrily, "Nonsense. You used to be spoiled and would take your second sister's things, and that was one thing. But now your second sister's wedding is approaching. What could you possibly do with such jewelry and accessories even if you took them?" I really didn't want to argue with them anymore. It was utterly pointless. But because of Shun Yuzhou's baseless accusations, I still felt a surge of grievance. I stubbornly refused to back down. In the past, I never took anything from her, only she took from me. This time, I won't give in. It was mine to begin with. My parents looked embarrassed, clearly thinking I was in the wrong. Since Shun Yuzhou gradually rose to prominence and settled in the capital, The Shun family gradually no longer needed me. I've been in such situations countless times before. I never really intended to fight for that hairpin anyway. I've never managed to win anything before, just unwilling to admit defeat verbally. But Wei Changqing, standing behind me, placed 10 taels of silver on the counter with a measured weight. Wrap it up. We still have to go to the next place. Shen Yuzhou stopped the shopkeeper from reaching for the hairpin and said angrily, General Wei, a man of your stature, would you really allow a child to snatch things? I was furious and wanted to explain that I wasn't snatching anything. Wei Changqing spoke again in a deep voice. As a rough soldier who just arrived in the capital, if I take a liking to something, I take it. What does it matter if it's snatched or not? Shen Yuzhou's face instantly turned ashen, and for a long moment, he couldn't utter a word. He prided himself on being a learned and refined scholar, skilled in debating right and wrong with others. But when faced with Wei Changqing's shameless words, he found himself momentarily at a loss for a retort. Even the top scholar flushed red with anger, his expression filled with disgust. Shen Yuzhou took a long moment to snap back to reality. He could never bear to see Shen Zhaoyun go without something she truly wanted. With a darkened expression, he placed 20 taels of silver on the counter. Shopkeeper, we'll take it. I really think this is quite pointless, I thought. Reaching out to grab Wei Changqing's sleeve, let's go. But Wei Changqing didn't leave. He took a banknote from his sleeve and placed it on top of the 10 taels of silver. Add another 100 taels. Shen Yuzhou looked at him in utter shock. After a long pause, he ultimately did not take out any more silver. Spending over 100 taels of silver to buy a hairpin worth only 10 taels, he could not bring himself to do something so damaging to his reputation. Shen Zhaoyun clenched her hands tightly. Her eyes filled with unwillingness. When she looked at me, she could no longer feign a cheerful smile. Wei Changqing took the wrapped hairpin, held my hand, and strode away with me. Shen Zhaoyun could no longer hold back and buried herself in the top scholar's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. My parents and Shen Yuzhou took turns comforting her. Their words mingled with discontent and blame directed at me. Those faint, fragmented voices drifted into my ears. I felt a little sad, and a bit heartbroken over that 100 taels of silver. And yet, it seemed like there was more to it. It felt like something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Someone had led me to a victory. My heart felt quite relieved. The top scholar held Shen Zhaoyun, his tone tinged with sourness. Indeed, a rustic who suddenly gained power and wealth overnight knows nothing of the people's hardships. How many commoners could be fed and clothed with these 100 taels of silver? Wei Changqing stopped in his tracks and turned around, a smile playing on his lips. The common people are well taken care of by Lord Shu and Prime Minister Shen. My vision is short-sighted, but what my wife likes is worth 10,000 gold. The top scholar's face turned pale and then flushed, and it took him a long while to force out a single sentence. Vulgar. How vulgar. We walked out. Behind us, Shen Yuzhou's expression seemed conflicted. He opened his mouth, as if wanting to call out to me. In the end, I still didn't speak. The winter street was bathed in bright sunlight, and I took out the hairpin to look at it. The white jade shimmered with a soft, lustrous glow under the warm sun. Exceptionally beautiful. Squinting at the hairpin, I thought to myself, from now on, I probably won't be returning to the Shen family for real. The nursemaid following behind me indignantly spoke up on my behalf. A stray picked up from who knows where, and they treasure him so much. They don't even care about their own daughter or sister. Shen Zhaoyun was a little beggar my mother picked up by the roadside when my brother was just over a year old. The sunlight stings my eyes a little. I withdraw my gaze and carefully put away the hairpin. After a long while, I say softly, it's all right. I don't need them to care about me either. The Empress Dowager was particularly wary of Wei Changqing. The assassins in black who infiltrated at night to kill Wei Changqing came more and more frequently, and their martial arts grew increasingly formidable. The last time, I was nearly stabbed. While protecting me, Wei Changqing suffered a severe sword wound on his arm, deep enough to reveal the bone. Rumors spread through the palace that assassins had broken in several times. Shen Yuzhou came to see me for once. He said he had obtained an edict from the Empress Dowager to take me back. He claimed that with the court in turmoil, I could no longer stay with the Wei family. I refused. He could hardly conceal his shock. It seemed he believed that as long as he was willing to take me back, I would be overjoyed and immediately burst into tears, following him without hesitation. Now, I don't even feel like talking to him much anymore. As I pushed him aside to go in, his gaze fixed on me. It had been many years since I'd seen it. A trace of loneliness and unease seemed to flicker in the depths of his eyes, and perhaps a hint of regret. After I narrowly escaped another assassination attempt, I went with my wet nurse to the market to buy lanterns, hoping to release them for both Wei Changqing and myself, praying for peace. On the street, Shen Jiaoyun suddenly appeared, blocking my path. She clearly still held a grudge over failing to snatch the hairpin last time. Her eyes were filled with unconcealed resentment and hostility. She sneered, "Do you think our eldest brother arranged for you to marry in my place just because I despise that country bumpkin?" I didn't understand. Wasn't that the reason? Perhaps there was another reason. Shen Yuzhou has now begun to feel somewhat wary of me, wary of the rumors that I am a heaven-sent lucky star. So you want to send me away, to prove that he can continue to hold the position of chancellor without relying on me. In the end, it's only for these two reasons. Shen Jiaoyun looked at me with a pitying expression. "You're such a fool. The general's mansion has been infiltrated by assassins so many times. Can't you see who those assassins belong to?" I was momentarily stunned. Shen Jiaoyun took a step closer to me, a vengeful delight gleaming in her eyes. "Big brother personally sent the men. The Empress Dowager is wary of Wei Changqing, whom the emperor promoted to the capital. Big brother took the initiative to ease her worries. If I were to marry him and share a bed with Wei Changqing, blades and swords have no eyes. You might end up in danger along with him. But as for you," Shen Jiaoyun curved his eyes into a smile, "if you die, my elder brother and parents naturally won't be as heartbroken. Perhaps by then, no one will say that your brother's current success is because of you. He would be more than happy about it." I wanted to argue, to say it's impossible. I wanted to say that even if Shen Yuzhou no longer likes me now, I am still his only biological sister. He couldn't possibly be willing to send me down a path of certain death. But in a flash of insight, I suddenly remembered the man in black from last night. He was wearing a mask, yet in that fleeting glance, I caught sight of his eyes, deep and cold, with a profound sense of familiarity. I suddenly remembered clearly that person's eyes must have been Shen Yuzhou's. After many failed assassination attempts, he could no longer hold back and took matters into his own hands. I thought back to all the previous times. Those figures in black seemed vaguely familiar. They appeared to be the death warriors raised by Shen Yuzhou back at the Shen residence. I gradually felt as if my body was sinking bit by bit into an icy abyss. I recalled the first night at the Wei residence, when an arrow pierced through the bed curtains and shot toward me. If Wei Changqing hadn't reacted swiftly and risked his life to protect me, I would have most likely been struck by the arrow. That night, Wei Changqing was stabbed by the sword. Even a strong and physically fit martial artist like him was unconscious for half a month, teetering on the brink of life and death. The sword was poisoned, and the arrows likely were too. I was only a 7-year-old child, far from possessing Wei Changqing's physique. If I had been assassinated that night, I would have died long ago. I stood dazed in the street, as if my entire body had gone numb. It was snowing again, and the streets were growing emptier. Many vendors had already packed up their stalls. Shen Jiaoyun had long since left, and the nursemaid seemed to be calling out to me. I couldn't snap out of my daze. She took out her handkerchief again, wiping my face with eyes full of heartache. "Good Fu, Don't cry, don't cry. Was I crying? I wasn't, I had long stopped caring. The Shun family doesn't want me, but I clearly stopped caring about them long ago. I stared blankly at my wet nurse. The next moment, everything went black before my eyes, and I collapsed to the ground. The night the man in black infiltrated the general's mansion again, Wei Chongqing was not at home. Having been urgently summoned to the palace by the emperor, I lay in bed, hearing a faint rustle of wind at the window. I woke up. I made no sound. In the blink of an eye, the man was already at my bedside. The maid who had been keeping watch by my side had already fainted. In the dim light, the black-clad man's sword tip pierced the bedding on the floor beside the bed. That was where Wei Chongqing used to lie. I didn't really see his eyes clearly, but my instinct told me it was him again. I called out to him in the night, "Brother." Actually, ever since Shen Yuzhou started being wary of me these past 2 years, we've often ended up arguing. It had been a long time since I called him like that. For some reason, I suddenly felt the urge to call out to him. Perhaps it was because I had made up my mind. After tonight, there would truly be no more ties between me and the Shen family. The hand holding the sword stabbed into empty air. The moment my words fell, he froze abruptly. In the blink of an eye, he had swiftly left through the window. I rose and took a carriage back to the Shun residence overnight. This was the first time I had returned to my maiden home since my marriage. Shen Yuzhou refused to see me. The guard said he had business outside the city. I waited outside the door and said, "Tell him that if I don't get to see him, I'll go wailing outside the imperial palace, saying the current prime minister attempted to assassinate my husband." Shen Yuzhou wasn't exactly afraid after all. Who would take a 7-year-old's tantrum seriously? But being a man of dignity, he naturally disliked losing face. I waited a while, and sure enough, he emerged. He wore a moon-white long gown, embodying the graceful elegance of a refined scholar, without a trace of the black-clad assassin from just moments before. If not for that flicker of panic that flashed through his eyes, as soon as he walked up to me, he scolded me as usual. "Nonsense. What do you mean assassinating your husband? Ever since Wei Chongqing has been around, he's been a bad influence on you. Do you even realize that slandering an imperial official?" I walked over to the stone table in the front courtyard and looked at him, saying, "Brother, come sit." Shen Yuzhou abruptly fell silent, frowned for a moment, but still came over and sat down. It's been so long since I properly called out to him. His expression seemed a bit awkward. After he sat down, I stood beside him and looked at the top of his head. I reached out, plucked a withered maple leaf from his hair, and placed it on the stone table. Shen Yuzhou's face instantly stiffened. I also sat down, looking at him calmly, and said, "There are no maple trees in the Shun residence, but the general's courtyard has several planted." I picked up that leaf, pushed it in front of him, and said, "You need to be more careful next time." Shen Yuzhou had always been a man of remarkable composure, yet at this moment, his face had noticeably paled. The very same prime minister who could effortlessly debate a room full of scholars in court was, for a fleeting moment, struck speechless with panic. It took him a long while before he could speak again. I went out of the city in the afternoon. At that time, I rode past a few maple trees in the mountains. If he weren't feeling guilty, he would have long lost the patience to explain such trivial matters to me. I looked at his attempt to cover up and said, "I was lying to you. There are no maple trees in the general's residence. I had the coachman pick this leaf up on the way." In his stunned and suddenly awakened gaze, I added, "You didn't leave the city this afternoon either, did you?" This afternoon I met Shen Zhaoyun and my parents. They were deliberately showing off to me. They said Shen Yuzhou spent the entire afternoon with the top scholar and a group of officials, discussing court affairs. Shen Yuzhou's face flushed with anger. What he could least tolerate now was being deceived and played for a fool, but I hadn't come tonight to argue with him. I didn't say anything more, just looked at him calmly. Under my steady gaze, The anger on Shinjujo's face gradually faded. He is such a lofty figure now, yet after a brief moment of eye contact with me, he uneasily averted his gaze. I couldn't help but ask, "Is my life and death really that insignificant?" Shinjujo suddenly looked at me again, a hint of urgency surfacing in his expression. "I know my limits. I won't hurt you." He was still trying to deceive himself. I couldn't help but remind him, the arrow that shot toward the bed on the first night, the blade that was thrust at me, it was Wei Changqing who risked his life to block it for me. He and I were complete strangers, having met for the first time on our wedding night, and he was known to be a reckless brute with a notorious reputation. No one could have expected that he would save me like that night, not to mention, many times after that, the man in black came again late at night, and it was Wei Changqing who protected me from being assassinated. Shinjujo averted his gaze. "My people will be careful, and besides, it wouldn't have been life-threatening anyway." I was left speechless. Even at this moment, it seems there is still a hint of sadness in my heart. I had thought that, even if he cared more about Shinjiaoyun now, at the very least, he wouldn't be willing to gamble with my life. For many years in the past, my parents always favored Shinjiaoyun the most. When they still needed me, they would occasionally call me their little lucky star. But what Shinjiaoyun liked and wanted, they were never willing to share even a little with me. But Shinjujo was different. The only wooden carved tiger at the stall, both 4-year-old me and Shinjiaoyun wanted it. My parents wanted to buy it for Shinjiaoyun. But Shinjujo insisted on taking it and giving it to me, saying, "Little sister is young, we should spoil her a bit more." When I was sick with a high fever, my parents took Shinjiaoyun to the street market to see the lanterns. Shinjujo stayed with me all night, personally wiping me down. I cried and said I also wanted to see the lanterns. He sat by my bedside and made one for me with his own hands. When it was finished, he wrote the words "Afu, safe and sound" on the lantern. I just can't help but think of it from time to time. There was indeed a time when he treated me very well for several years. Shinjujo's face trembled, and he finally seemed to feel a hint of guilt. "It was my oversight. But as I said, I will find a way to bring you back." I looked at him for a long time before finally speaking again. "Brother, did I do something wrong?" Shinjujo abruptly turned his head away, a faint mist seeming to gather in the depths of his eyes. The hand hanging at his side had veins bulging prominently on the back. I continued softly, "Once you said, if one day you could rise above the clouds, you wanted to be a good official, to plead for the people. So I walked this path with you, helping you draw lots to distinguish right from wrong. Others joked that you relied on me, but as long as I am your sister for a day, I will only ever be your sister. I don't understand court politics, nor am I a man. I can't contend for your power, nor seize your advantages. I just want to hear you praise me, saying, 'Afu can help her brother share his worries. Take me to buy a small wooden tiger from the street market. I don't care what others say, I just don't understand.'" My throat ached slightly, and I steadied my voice before speaking. "I just don't understand. Why have you truly started to fear me, to dislike me? Why have you begun to push me into life and death danger? Have I been wrong all these years?" Shinjujo's hand, hanging at his side, gradually clenched into a trembling fist. He looked at me, his eyes already red. The last time I saw his eyes redden, it seemed to be when I was 4 years old. I was lying in bed with a high fever, and he was so anxious he nearly shed tears. Shinjujo's voice began to tremble. Afu, I didn't." Even he could no longer believe such words. A person's love, hatred, joy, and disgust are, in truth, very difficult to conceal. It shows in the corners of the eyes, the tips of the brows, in every subtle detail. Like the brother who used to help me snatch the little tiger when our parents defended Shinjiaoyun, now he can spend double the money to snatch the hairpin I had my eye on, all because Shinjiaoyun said she liked it. What I care about was never just a hairpin. I quietly thought it over again. and it seemed like everything that needed to be said had been said. Well then, that's that, although I am always the one being abandoned, at least this time. I didn't cry again, I didn't beg the one who abandoned me to keep me, I didn't have to see their disgusted, impatient eyes again. At least this time, I will leave with my head held high. Thinking this, I straightened my back a little and raised my head a little. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out the small wooden tiger. Although its back had been smoothed from all my touching, although Shinjujo had started to neglect me over the past few years, I still held it close every night to fall asleep. But I still put on a nonchalant expression and placed it on the stone table, saying, I'm returning this to you. From now on, I am no longer your sister, nor am I a child of the Shin family. In that case, I was the one who abandoned them. I have no reason to feel pitiful or ashamed. I stood up and turned to leave the Shin residence. The man behind me, however, abruptly rose to his feet and grabbed my arm tightly. I heard Shinjujo's trembling, panicked voice, as if he found it difficult to speak. Afu, it was my fault. I won't do it again in the future. He now holds a high position, second only to one person. It's probably been many years since he last lowered his head even slightly to anyone, let alone admitted a mistake. If it were me before I got married, I would have been deeply moved. But now, I no longer want to hear such words, nor do I need them. I wanted to pull my hand back, but his grip was too strong, and I couldn't free it. For the first time, I even felt a bit impatient. I turned around and reminded him, I no longer have an older brother. Your Afu died long ago under the rain of arrows. Though I was young, I was not a fool. If it weren't for Wei Changqing's protection, so many times in danger, those men in black never showed any mercy, I wouldn't have survived, I couldn't have. Just because Shinjujo said, after all, it won't cost you your life, and truly, I will not die. Shinjujo's broad hand gripped my arm, but I don't know where the strength came from. I gritted my teeth and still pulled my hand back. I walked out the door without any further hesitation. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the gradually reddening and pained look in Shinjujo's eyes. It seemed he was genuinely feeling a bit of regret, but I knew he was only disgusted by the thing slipping from his grasp, truly losing control. I was almost at the main gate. The man behind me suddenly spoke coldly. Close the main gate. Third Miss has returned to the Shin family. From now on, she has nothing to do with the Wei family. I can't believe my ears. It was clearly him who no longer liked me, who drove me out to marry someone else. Now, they are forcing me to stay like this again. My heart sank. I remembered I had promised Wei Changqing that I would obediently wait for him to return from the palace and bring me roasted chestnuts. I came here with only a coachman, didn't even tell my wet nurse, so he won't be able to find me. I was eager to step out the door, but the guards outside had already stopped me with stern expressions. Then the heavy door slowly closed. Shinjujo was behind me, walking toward me step by step. His voice carried a desperate resolve that brooked no argument. Afu, you're right. You will always just be my sister. Before, I was the one who lost my mind and thought wrong. From now on, everything will be just like it was before you turned 5. I promise, I will never leave you behind again. That hand reached for my arm again, the door now completely shut. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with intense disgust and fear, and I shoved him away fiercely. Get out of my way, let me go back. Shinjujo must have been in a daze. When I pushed him, he actually staggered back 2 steps. He looked at me with frustration and regret. Afu, I am your brother. We are biological siblings. This is your home. I lost control and shouted angrily. No. Shinjujo looked at me with disbelief. His eyes, already reddened, were filled with sorrow. Despite my resistance and retreat, he kept closing in on me step by step. You've been led astray by that reckless man. To the point where you no longer recognize your home and family. Let your brother take you to rest. I'll sing the nursery rhymes I used to sing for you. I felt fear towards him for the first time. finding his appearance terrifying. I kept stepping back, until my back hit the heavy bronze door, and I could retreat no further. Suddenly, intense fighting noises erupted from outside the door behind me. Shinjujo's face abruptly darkened as he turned to the guards in the courtyard. About to issue a command, a figure had already leaped onto the extremely high surrounding wall. The man held a sword, his face ashen, as if he had descended from the sky. It took me a long moment to snap out of my shock and regain my composure. More than a dozen skilled guards in the courtyard had mostly fallen. The remaining two, wounded, retreated in front of Shinjujo, shouting with a fierce but hollow threat. Daring to break into the Prime Minister's residence to assassinate, does General Wei no longer value his head? I focused my gaze and finally recognized Wei Changqing. His face smeared with blood, he had swiftly slipped behind the two guards, his long sword pressed against Shinjujo's neck. It was the first time I had seen him so angry, his face contorted with rage. It was the Prime Minister who first abducted my wife. As soon as he arrived, he saw the tightly shut bronze door and heard my tearful voice from inside, so I thought it was Shinjujo who brought me back. Shinjujo has always been composed, but now, with a sword pressed against his neck, even he lost a bit of his imposing presence. Shinfu is my own sister. She returned to her maiden home on her own. How could there be any talk of kidnapping? Wei Changqing took a long moment to come back to his senses, as if he had just remembered that I was a child of the Shin family. He hesitated for a while before sheathing his sword, his expression betraying a sense of guilt, yet he was unwilling to admit that it was his own fault. Then it was also wrong for you to lock up my wife. The bronze door opened, and a new wave of guards surged in from outside. In panic, I dashed toward Wei Changqing. His sword-wielding hand immediately turned the blade behind him. He reached out, scooped me up, and lifted me onto his arm. He asked me, "Shinfu, do you want to stay? Or come with me?" Without hesitation, my eyes reddened as I looked at him. "I'll go with you. I want to go home and eat roasted chestnuts." Wei Changqing's eyes lit up again, and he laughed heartily. Heavy guards surrounded him. Shinjujo's eyes were bloodshot as he ordered the door to be shut again. He roared, "Spread the word after tonight." General Wei entered the Prime Minister's residence late at night to assassinate him, but was accidentally killed by the guards in self-defense. He waved his hand, signaling the heavily armed guards to step forward and take action. I was still in Wei Changqing's arms. Once again, he disregarded my safety, only adding a self-deceiving remark, "Be careful not to harm the young lady. Blades have no eyes. It's impossible to guarantee absolute safety." Shinjujo couldn't possibly be unaware of this. I looked at him. Finally, I felt that the face I once relied on the most had now become completely unrecognizable. Wei Changqing cast a disdainful glance at Shinjujo. The bronze door was violently forced open, and the general's guards swarmed in. Amid the clash between the two sides, he held me tightly and swung his sword to fend off several guards. Then he leaped up, his soles lightly tapping the heads of the surging crowd, and effortlessly made his way out of the Prime Minister's residence. Suddenly, I thought, he should be able to handle all these guards by himself. He was afraid of accidentally hurting me, which is why he didn't dare to act more boldly while holding me. A tall, sturdy horse was waiting outside the mansion gate. Wei Changqing sheathed his sword, strode forward, and took hold of the reins. Remembering something, he looked up and asked me, "Are you scared?" With reddened eyes, I shook my head. "No, I'm not." When I was 4 or 5 years old, Shinjujo had taken me horseback riding with him several times. Back then, he was still riding high on success and hadn't yet started to be wary of me or keep his distance. It seems no matter where he goes, he likes to take me along. I bit my lip to keep myself from crying. Wei Changqing lifted me onto the horse and placed me in front of him, inside the minister's residence. Shinjujo stumbled out in a rush. I took one last look at him and saw that his moon-white robe was stained with dirty blood. I don't know if he had fallen, but his face seemed smeared with mud and dust. Even his long hair, which had been tied up high with a hair crown, had come loose. He was a scholar. From the moment I was born, he had already passed the imperial examination at the county level, in 7 years. It was probably the first time I had seen him in such a sorry state. Shen Zhaoyun also suddenly rushed out from the courtyard, her face full of urgency as she tried to dissuade Shen Yuzhou, big brother. Afu has married into the general's mansion and is now a member of the Wei family. Why go to such great lengths? Shen Yuzhou suddenly reached out and shoved her to the ground with force. His face twisted as if he had suddenly come to see Shen Zhaoyun as a mortal enemy. Get out, get away from me. Afu will always be a member of the Shen family. You are the outsider. He laid hands on Shen Zhaoyun for the first time. Shen Zhaoyun, caught off guard, fell to the ground, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked utterly humiliated, seething with anger but not daring to speak out. I wonder, why does he have to put on such an act now? I turned my head away and whispered to Wei Changqing, let's go. The whip cracked. Behind him was Shen Yuzhou's voice, nearly out of control and filled with despair. Afu, Afu, don't go. I'm your brother. I'm your real brother. Afu. I think I heard him crying. Trembling and helpless, hoarse and broken. I must have misheard. In 7 years, the number of times he even got red-eyed could be counted on one hand. No matter how great the trouble, I never cried out loud. The horse galloped away. In the blink of an eye, I could no longer hear his voice. The chaotic sounds of fighting behind me quickly faded from hearing, only the galloping of the horse, the howling wind in my ears, and Wei Changqing's warm breath. The long street was dark and deathly silent. With no one else to be seen in the deep night, my life always seems to go around in circles like this, becoming the option that gets left behind. The long street seemed to have no end, stretching endlessly into the pitch-black night ahead. Suddenly, I couldn't hold back any longer and sobbed out loud, Wei Changqing. I've lost my home again. Wei Changqing held the reins tightly with one hand and embraced me firmly with the other. The winter night after the rain was bone-chillingly cold. His palm was rough yet scorching hot, resting at my waist. That warmth seemed to seep through my dress, bringing me a sense of comfort. He remained silent for a long time, only speaking up when my sobs grew louder. I have you, Xiao Fu. As long as I have a home, Xiao Fu will always have a home. I would never believe him. Everyone said the same thing at the beginning. I cried in deep sorrow. You're lying. Sooner or later, you will abandon me too. Wei Changqing fell silent again. And a long moment of quiet followed. Look, he can't even bring himself to utter a few hypocritical words right now. With reddened eyes, I reached out and tugged at the hand he was using to hold me. Let go. Put me down. Wei Changqing suddenly tightened his grip. After a long while, it seemed as if he had made up his mind about something. I won't, Xiao Fu. I will never abandon you. I could no longer speak. Tears streamed down uncontrollably, and I cried until I couldn't catch my breath. I cried until I was exhausted, my eyelids too heavy to lift, and gradually slipped into a deep sleep. In my daze, it seemed Wei Changqing had scooped me up into his arms. I had a dream, in which I woke up still perched high on horseback. Wei Changqing was gone, and all around me stretched an endless wilderness. The horse suddenly galloped, and I fell off its back, letting out a sharp scream before jolting awake. When I opened my eyes, I was already lying back in my bed at the general's residence. Wei Changqing, who always slept by my bedside every night, was gone. An overwhelming unease filled my heart. I got out of bed, slipped on my shoes, and went out to look for him. Through the paper window of the study, I heard him speaking with a man. I recognized the man's voice. It was the current emperor. Over the past 6 months, he had visited Wei Changqing several times. The two of them always dismissed the attendants and spoke privately in the study. As if they were plotting something of great importance, I didn't dare to listen and turned to leave, but I still faintly heard Wei Changqing's words, "Once everything is settled and your majesty has secured the throne, could you allow your subordinate to take my wife and younger brother, resign from office, and return to our hometown?" My footsteps suddenly came to a halt. I remembered the words he spoke to me after a long silence on horseback. "Xiao Fu, I will never abandon you, truth be told." I didn't quite dare to take it seriously. In the study, the emperor's voice was filled with astonishment. "General Wei, when you defeated my death warriors back then, and brought your brother into the capital, that's not what you said. You brothers claimed you only wished to die together with the Empress Dowager and that male favorite. I don't quite understand. Wei Changqing never told me about his grievances with the Empress Dowager, nor did he ever mention his family, but instinctively, I felt a vague sense of unease. I couldn't make out what was said inside as the voices gradually faded away. I returned to my room. Wei Changqing soon came back and lay down on the bedding beside my bed. The candle was extinguished, and the bright moon shone brilliantly outside the window. The moonlight flowing in was like a river, and all around was utterly silent. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, yet I didn't dare ask too directly. After some thought, I only managed to ask, "Wei Changqing, did you really kill a tiger with your bare hands?" Wei Changqing was not asleep, lost in thought. He chuckled softly in the darkness. "It was just a young tiger that had just learned to bite. It clamped down on my sister's leg up in the mountains. Besides the brother he had mentioned to the emperor, it turned out he also had a sister. I've been at the general's residence for so long, yet I haven't seen a single family member of his." I felt surprised and shifted my body closer to the edge of the bed, looking at him in the dim light. After a moment, Wei Changqing seemed a bit distracted. "I used that tiger skin to make a shawl for my sister. She put it on with great pride, saying it made her look imposing." I couldn't help but feel a bit curious and said, "How old is she now? Does she live here too? How come I've never seen her?" Wei Changqing fell silent again. I thought he had fallen asleep, and was about to turn over with some regret to sleep myself. In the darkness, he suddenly spoke again. "She's dead. The Empress Dowager's male favorite traveled south for amusement, forcibly seized her, and was bitten on the hand by her. He dragged her for miles with a fierce horse." His voice grew deeper, gradually tinged with hatred. "My parents sought justice. He was imprisoned, and under torture, he died." I was utterly shocked, suddenly understanding why I had never met his family. I also understood what the maids had whispered. Perhaps it's because she looks like. They meant who I resembled. For a moment, I was at a loss, regretting that I had even asked. Wei Changqing suddenly sat up, in the darkness, his burning gaze fixed on me as he said, "Shen Fu."